Hello everyone, welcome to the JW Review. My name is Mike Felker, and this is the weekly podcast where we review Watchtower articles and compare them to what the scriptures teach. This week we're looking at article number 49, and this is from the December 2021 Watchtower Study Edition, and the article is titled, What Leviticus Teaches Us About How to Treat Others. And this is basically a continuance of the theme of the last study article. So I'd highly recommend checking that podcast out where we review that. And there was much to talk about, in particular as it relates to applying Jesus to these topics of law. Because as the Watchtower would admit, we are no longer under the Mosaic law in the same way that the Jews were under the Mosaic law. Okay, so things have changed. Now, what's mostly changed is that we are under the new covenant, which, unless you're one of the anointed Jehovah's Witnesses of the 144,000, you don't believe you are in the new covenant. You might believe that you are related to the new covenant in some way, but you're not actually in it. So that obviously can create a whole massive confusion if you claim to believe the scriptures. So we'll get into a little bit of that in this review. And this review, I think, is going to be pretty short. Not a lot to go over here. So let's look at the key text. It's Leviticus 19:18. And that says, "You shall not take vengeance, nor hold any grudge against the sons of your people. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Jehovah." So lots of discussion here about loving your neighbor, doing business dealings with integrity, things like that. Let's see if there's any other ones. Loving your fellow man as yourself, treating each other with dignity and respect. So a lot of themes that are, decent themes. This is not written in a way that I would write it if I was writing an article like this, but I'm not going to create too many complaints here. I just want to kind of focus on, I think, just like two paragraphs things I wanted to highlight. So let's go down and look at paragraph 16. It says, "When Jehovah commanded the Israelites to love their fellow man, he did not mean that they should show love only to those of the same race or nationality. They were also told to love the foreigners in their midst. That is the clear message found at Leviticus 19:33 and 34. So let's take a look at that. That says, "When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Jehovah your God." All right, let's continue on in the article in this paragraph 16. "The foreigner was to be treated like a native, and the Israelites were to love him as themselves. For example, the Israelites were to permit both the foreign residents and the poor to benefit from the gleaning arrangement. The principle about loving foreigners applies to Christians today. How so? There are millions of immigrants, and likely some live near you. It is important for us to treat these men, women, and children with dignity and respect." Now, I thought it was interesting here. They brought up Luke 10:30 through 37. So let's take a look at that. It's about the Good Samaritan, a story you're probably all familiar with. So let's read it. It's just 7 verses. "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he encountered robbers, and they stripped him and beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And by coincidence, a priest was going on that road, and when we saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion, and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own animal, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave him to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, "The one who showed compassion to him." Then Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." Now, many sermons, many books, have been written on this amazing account. Okay, the part I want to point out here and highlight is that this is not just simply about showing a foreigner hospitality. I mean, yeah, you should show a foreigner hospitality. And you can look at the principles provided at Leviticus 19 that we just read to show that. Now, providing hospitality for a foreigner doesn't just mean that it's on the condition that only if they believe and think like you. Now, it's obvious they don't look like you, okay? That much is already different. They could be a different skin color. They could have different cultures, whatever it might be. We can just put that part aside for a second. Let's look at what they actually might believe. Now, the interesting part about this whole Samaritan account is that the Samaritans were despised by the Jews. So, if you were to read this account to a Pharisee back in Jesus' day, they would have been like smugging their face the whole time. It's like, ooh, this Samaritan, right? If you want to kind of see more about this, just how the Jews looked at others who might have had some commonality with the Jews. I mean, look at the woman at the well, and those people, and what the Jews felt about them. Well, the Samaritans were basically the same, and so Jesus is intentionally bringing up this account of a Samaritan to prove a point, to where look at the most despised person, who you think is a faithful Jew. Look at the most despised person, and look at what they did. Look at the most elite, pious person walked by him, okay? That could have been your Pharisaical leaders. And then a priest or a Levite comes by. They could be like a tier down, maybe. And then you've got just who you think might just be the scum of the earth. And they take care of this person, and they do the right thing. So what's really interesting about this is if you're a faithful Jehovah's Witness, think about the people that you despise. Maybe even the people that you hate. Now, hate's a strong word. Maybe you don't hate anybody. Okay, people that you despise. Who am I talking about? Well, apostates. Apostates. Those who you as a faithful Jehovah's Witness have seen leave the faith. So if they leave the Jehovah's Witness faith, whether it's for disagreements on theology or immoral behavior, they're apostates. And you shun them. You don't talk to them. You don't greet them. You don't really look at them. You literally shun them. So take this account and put the person or people group that you most despise and read this account again, where you could say, a man was going down to... I'm going to read this account with the kind of people I have in mind here, if you're a Jehovah's Witness. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he encountered robbers, and they stripped him and beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And by coincidence, a governing body member was going on that road, and we saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a circuit overseer also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But an ex-Jehovah's Witness, an apostate, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion, and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own animal, and brought him back to the inn, and the apostate took care of him. On the next day the apostate took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you. Which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? It's the one who showed compassion. That bad, evil, terrible apostate, right? You see, that's the kind of light Jesus is trying to shine here. Jesus is taking the law, the Levitical law, love your neighbor as yourself, and this is just what Jesus does with, if you just read, like especially the Sermon on the Mount, he's taking a microscope and looking at the letter of the law and taking it apart and showing you, like, this is what it practically means. I mean, it's brought up a little bit in Leviticus because, it could have been in those days that if some kind of, let's say an Egyptian, one of those pagan Egyptians that had enslaved your people for 400 years wants to live among you, and maybe they haven't even changed their beliefs yet, right? Maybe there's just some reason how they ended up in your camp. And so the Levitical law, and especially what Jesus would say, is that you take care of him. You take care of him. And you're also not even asking anything in return. Okay? You're not trying to get something out of it. I mean, that's what it really means to love your neighbor as yourself. You're loving someone without expecting something in return. It's not a conditional type of thing. Now, one of the principles I wanted to kind of elaborate on here and bring up is Matthew 5:43, where this is Jesus talking. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Hate your enemy. Could that be like an apostate who you'd think is your enemy? But I say to you, love your enemies. Love your apostate enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may prove yourself to be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Now, here's where the actions speak much, much louder than words. Let's read that again. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors, do they not do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Even the Gentiles, do they not do the same? Therefore you shall be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I bring this up because this is all about loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor, even loving your enemies. Now, it should be obvious that if you love your enemy, does that mean that you'll talk to your enemy? Well, yeah, it's kind of implied there, right? There's no room for shunning here. There's no room for shunning in the entire Bible. But here's the thing. So if we're talking about really loving your neighbor and letting your actions speak louder than the words, I want to put the magnifying glass on the Jehovah's Witness religion for a second. Now, this can apply to any religion, and we can talk about that. Believe me, we can definitely talk about that. But we're reviewing the Watchtower here. And so we're kind of keeping under that topic. So if we want to point the finger at someone else and put a microscope over there, fine. Like let's do it. Okay, but talking about Jehovah's Witnesses here, and they claim and they boast and they boast and they boast about the great love that they have for one another. And this is kind of one of the identifying marks. They are the true religion, right? Now, that doesn't actually impress me. I mean, that's boasted all the time. It's in their literature all the time. I think the last 2 reviews ago, we looked at some of the main reasons why the Jehovah's Witnesses are the true religion. So we did a whole review on that. So definitely check that out. But one of the reasons, we find this in all the publications, is that their love and their devotion for one another. Now, the reason that doesn't impress me is because of Jesus' words right here. Let's read this again. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors, do they not do the same? I mean, think about like the mafia and the cartels. Like, a lot of those have like very tight families that are involved in these corrupt business practices. I mean, these guys are devoted to themselves, right? I mean, it's conditional, certainly, but they love each other, right? They're a very tight-knit group in their families, right? And they'll take a bullet for each other. So it's like when the Jehovah's Witnesses boast and boast and boast about the great love they have for each other, I'm like thinking to myself, okay, that's fine, great, but look at Jesus' words here. It's like that's not the part that should be the most impressive. What the part that would be most impressive is how much do you love your enemy and those who are not part of your group. Look what he says, and if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than the others? Even the Gentiles, do they not do the same? So if you really want to impress me, if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, show me how much disaster relief work you do for non-Jehovah's Witnesses, or how much charity work you're doing, whether it's domestic or abroad. How much of that are you doing for those who are not of your religion with no strings attached whatsoever, without an agenda that you're going to be able to place your magazines with them? How many Jehovah's Witnesses can say that the thing that most impresses me most about this religion is how much we love our enemies and love those who are not a part of our religion in the way that Jesus is talking about right here? Okay? Because a Jehovah's Witness might say that they show all this great love for their enemies and their neighbors by sharing the good news with them. Okay, fine. I'll grant that. But can you actually do the hard work, the charity work, the disaster relief, that kind of thing? Like, if someone's cold, give them your jacket. Read this whole account, the whole Sermon on the Mount, all of this charitable stuff that Jesus is talking about giving to the poor. And he's not just talking about those who are in your group. I mean, you should do that, but that part's obvious because even the Gentiles will do that. It's about loving your neighbor with no strings attached, not asking for anything in return. Now, if you do know of accounts where the Jehovah's Witnesses have done some amazing relief work and charities for non-Jehovah's Witnesses, please share that with me. But for now, I want you to just think about all this and think about this religion and your involvement with this religion if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And really just think and meditate on Jesus' words. And please read the whole Sermon on the Mount and ask yourself, is this the religion that's doing that? Because the Watchtower set themselves up on this standard that they've created, that they're the most loving ones, okay? All right, so let's go down to paragraph 17. Paragraph 18. While we may engage in various spiritual activities and do many good works, Peter highlighted one in particular. Leading up to his encouragement to become holy in all our conduct, Peter urges us, brace up your minds for activity. What would that activity involve? Peter said that Christ's anointed brothers would declare abroad the excellencies of the one who called them. In fact, all Christians today have the honor of doing this most important work, one that does the greatest amount of good. What a special privilege we have as a holy people to share regularly and zealously in the preaching and teaching work. When we diligently apply the principles found in Leviticus chapter 19, we prove that we love our God and our neighbor, and we show that we want to become holy in all our conduct. Now, I'm actually glad the Watchtower brought up 1 Peter 2:9, because back in 1 Peter 1 that we read in last week's review, I forgot about this, but when it talks about the one who has called you, in chapter 2, Peter clarifies it. He says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you," this priesthood, "may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of God, and you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." So, the Watchtower would say this is talking specifically about the anointed class. And this is where the trouble comes in. Back when I talked about this whole new covenant thing, where you can somehow benefit from the new covenant without actually being in the new covenant. That whole idea is not found in the scriptures at all. At all. Either you are in the new covenant or you are not. And there's no other way. There is no other way. So what the Watchtower likes to do is they like to take these passages that, in their view, is only talking about the anointed class and somehow draw from that this command. This applies to all Christians. But why? The Apostle Peter doesn't know about this. But the Watchtower, look, this is what they say. It says, what would that activity involve? Peter said that Christ's anointed brothers would declare abroad the excellencies of the one who has called them. So there's only one group who's been called, according to Peter. It's these ones right here. If there was someone else, why wouldn't he mention someone else? But yet, the Watchtower wants to apply this to all Christians today have the honor of doing this most important work. This most important work. What work? Well, this work here that's supposedly only talking about the anointed, that you proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. There's only one group here who has been called. It says you were once not a people, but now you are the people of God. So you see how this whole two classes theology creates utter confusion out of the scriptures? Because when you're reading this as a Jehovah's Witness, you have to say, well, he's just talking about the anointed class there, but I gotta somehow make this apply to me, even though I'm not in this text. See how that works? You see how that works? Now, it talks about the preaching and teaching work here. Okay, so Christians are to proclaim the excellencies of him. Okay, I get that. Yeah, absolutely. You got to have the right message too. But if we go back and combine that to loving your neighbor, to really love your neighbor in these ways is to help those who are in need, to help your neighbor with no strings attached. I have one more verse passage I want to pull up here. Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus says, verse 34, the king will say to his right, this is after he separates the sheep and the goats. He says, those on the right, come, you are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? In other words, we didn't know we did this. The king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. So in other words, these people, these sheep, were so faithful. They were so faithful to loving their neighbor. The greatest of commandments that Jesus said. They're so faithful to that they were loving people without even knowing who they were. No strings attached. They clothed these people. They gave them something to drink, something to eat. And they didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't even know they were even faithful believers. That's how faithful they were. Right? They didn't have these special lenses that they could put on and say, oh, that's a Christian, that's not a Christian, or if you're a Jehovah's Witness, oh, that's a Jehovah's Witness, that's not a Jehovah's Witness. To faithful followers of Christ, they don't have these special glasses they put on. They don't even care whether someone's faithful or not. It's take care of everybody with no strings attached and no discrimination. That's the principle here. Now, it's a shame that the Watchtower says this is talking about the anointed class, right? Which is a terrible, terrible interpretation here. This has nothing to do with a special anointed class of Christians, because notice this says they didn't know who these people were. And this is talking about the poor and the needy, right? It's not talking about a separate class of Christians. A bad interpretation. So, but the whole principle here is love. This is the true meaning of the law right here. Jesus puts that magnifying glass on that law of love your neighbor and shows this is what it means to really love. So, if you want to impress people with your religion, then this is what you need to be doing. This is what you need to show all of us. If you really are the most loving religion in the world, and that's the standard that you're setting up for yourself, then show us how you are doing all of this the best, and then we'll talk. Okay. So we're going to wrap it up there. Hope that was all helpful to you. Hope this is encouraging to you. There's so much here that I don't know, since I've never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, as far as like how much charity work like actually happens. So if you have any insight on that, whether you actually were involved with charities as a Jehovah's Witness, or you weren't, what that looked like, please leave me your comments and share with all of us kind of what that looked like in your experience, because I'm only looking at this more like academically. I can only go by what I read and maybe even what I hear from others. So hearing from others is something I love to see, and others love to see. So when you leave your comments, you really, you're not only encouraging me, you're encouraging so many other people who read these comments. So please do that. If you do have something you want to send to me personally, you can do that as well. Go down to the show notes or the video description. You can contact me privately via email, WhatsApp, Skype. We can talk on the phone. All that's great. I am at your disposal. So if you do want to talk to somebody about any of this kind of stuff, I love to talk to people about this. So please feel free to contact me. If you do want to support this work, please consider hitting the notification bell, the like button, and especially to subscribe. That helps all the algorithms to get this kind of work noticed. And it also helps you to get reminded when we post new content, which I try to do weekly. The best way, though, you can support this is by sharing this content with people who need to hear it. People who need to hear some good news. So especially since this whole community, by and large, seems like the majority is coming from an unbelieving worldview. Those who leave the Jehovah's Witnesses typically go into atheism or agnosticism or just complacency. So sharing content like this, there's other great channels like mine doing a similar work. So please share content like this, so that not only the secular stuff in this PMO and XJW community is getting recognized. So it's so important that you support channels like this. If you do want to contribute financially, you certainly can if you would like. That helps to keep the lights on, keep the technology updated, and all of that. So if you want to do that, you can become a monthly supporter through Patreon. Just go down to the show notes or video description, and there's a way to do that. Every little bit helps, and I greatly appreciate all of my supporters, whether financially or not. I really do appreciate all of you. This work is just so encouraging, and I hear day in, day out that this kind of work is needed. So thank you all so much for watching. Hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week. For more information about Jehovah's Witnesses and other topics, please visit michaeljfelker.com. There you can also reach me directly to submit questions or comments to be covered on the JW Review. To subscribe to this podcast, please go to iTunes and search for the JW Review.